We're just going to round out the last 2 weeks' discussion of Yonah Matzah B'Manoach, where the thrust of the explanation of the last 2 weeks has been who was the Yonah, who was the dove. It was Klal Yisrael. So obviously it was a takeoff on Yonah Lo Matzah B'Manoach in Parshat Noach, and the dove did not find a place of resting. And I cited a pasuk in Eicha in the beginning, Lo Matzah B'Manoach. It was reference to Klal Yisrael. So Rabbi Yehuda Levi had material to work with Yonah Matzah B'Manoach. However, the Kabbalists, as we'll see in a moment, took the Yonah to meaning HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Shekhinah. And to this end, we'll deal with the topic, at least the first part of the shiur, before we get to the next poem, which hopefully will be Yom Zeh Mechubad. Hope you all brought your tuning forks so we can sing it properly on key. Yeah. And Tehillim Perek Tzadik Aleph, in the first source. You have 2 pages stapled, but I'm on the page that had titled Imo Anochi B'Tzara, where Kadosh Baruch Hu says, I am with you in times of trouble and distress. I am with you. I, capital I, double time. Yikra'eni ve'enehu imo anochi b'tzara achalatzeyu va'achabdeyu. It's a pasuk that we're keenly familiar with, because anything that makes the siddur, we become familiar. And if you're in shul early enough for Psukei de Zimra, we say it every Shabbos. So we have this Perek Tzadik Aleph. We also say it, Shelo Neida Mitzarot, we say it at Levias, because of the pasuk, Ki malachav yitzaveh lach lishmorcha b'chol derachecha, and that's a pasuk that's not only relevant for halvayot, but for any time a person is on his way to a dangerous journey. Ki malachav yitzaveh lach lishmorcha b'chol derachecha. Believe me, we've been saying this pasuk often enough in the last year and a month for all of our chayalim. So I have a good news update on my son Eitan, Baruch Hashem. He's doing well in Shikum and rehab, and he'll be out of there sooner than later, and he's doing okay. My son Eitan, yeah, he was clipped. He was clipped. Okay, we didn't run it in the New York Times as a headline, but people did know about it. On Simchas Torah in the morning, I'm not going to review the whole story, but thank God he's doing well and he'll be out of there. But he did tell me this week, when I spoke to him about Birkat HaGomel, in a different setting, I'm teaching about Birkat HaGomel, and I asked him, I said, what about Goimel? So he said, well, I already did it, because there was a whole question, when do you bench Goimel if a person is sick or injured? So there are many poskim who say, when you're totally recovered as a person may be. Sometimes you never become totally recovered, but when a person is able to function. So he said he already benched Goimel for leaving Lebanon, and he'll bench Goimel again when he feels he's already off crutches, so he's on his way to full recovery, thank God. He's the pilot, yeah. Yeah, but he was busy doing something else in Lebanon, doing some of the heavy duty work. So So I asked him, I said, why would you bench Goimel twice? So he tells me, because it's 2 different Eiruim, 2 different things. One is, he said, anybody getting out of Lebanon or Gaza, coming home for a Shabbat, has to bench Goimel, because you just left the war zone, even if you're going back on Sunday or Monday. And the second is, he was hit, so he's recovering. So he felt that there were. So I said, fine, that's going to be a subject for a drasha, for a shir, whether you say Goimel. But my last comment to him was that the Rav Zichron Lebracha felt that Goimel can never be a bracha levatala if you really feel that a Kadosh Baruch Hu was holding your hand during the whole business. And the Rav said this in the context of what the Gemara says, Arba'at tzrichim lahodot, 4 people, the 4 categories of people who are obligated, who have to say Goimel. But the Gemara doesn't say chayavim, obligated. It says tzrichim, ought to say. So the Rav said, you see, it's TORAH, and that's a subjective call. So therefore, if a person says Goimel, then later wants to say Goimel again because the person thinks there's a need for another thank you, you can't do that. You can't do that. It's not a bracha levatala. So it's very much personal. And I'll just say that when my sister lives in Chashmonaim, so there are many people who work in the States in high tech, and they get back, on the Shabbos, they go every Monday to the Chutz La'aretz and get back on Friday. So there was 30 people lined up on Shabbos for bench goimel, which my sister said this was the Moadon HaGomel HaMatmid. So the rabbi put an end to it, and he said one should bench goimel, and they can all answer Amen, and that's also proper. So they can be moitzi them with the goimel, because that was like just ridiculous what was happening. Okay, but now let's function on Imo Anochi B'tzara. Kadosh Baruch Hu says, I will be with you in moments of distress and trouble. Source number 2 is the Zohar. And in the Zohar, it says, and this is Aramaic, but I'll read it and translate, De bizmana de shchinta ihi begaluta, the time that the Shekhinah, which is the nickname of a Kadosh Baruch Hu resting in this world, is in exile, itmar ba, it is said about it, velo matzah hayona manoach. In other words, when the Torah talks in Parshat Noach, that Noach sends out the Yonah, and to see if the water has dried, if the earth is now dry, and it comes back because it couldn't find a resting place. So the Zohar, the Kabbalistic source, explains this as being the Shekhinah did not find a resting place, which means that when Am Yisrael is in Galut, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is there with us in Galut, and it also means that while in Galut, we're not supposed to feel comfortable and at home. And I remember the Rav saying, we were studying the Parshat Bereshit. He was saying, beginning of Parshat Shmot. So it says, Ve'el Shmot Bnei Yisrael, Haba'im Mitzrayma. Eit Yaakov ish uveito ba'u. It says Haba'im, they are coming to Egypt. And then it says, they came. So, one second, anybody in a grammar class would write such a sentence would fail. How can you have the present tense and then end with the past tense? Make up your mind. What is it? So, I'll just say parenthetically, the pshat is that Ve'el Shmot B'nei Yisrael Haba'im Mitzrayma is a quote from Parshat Vayigash. Ramban says this, not my own idea. Ramban says this, that the Torah simply took a pasuk in Parshat Vayigash that talks about Yaakov coming down to Mitzrayim with all his children, 70 people in all, and there the present tense is appropriate. Ve'el Shmot, and here are the names of Bnei Yaakov who are coming into Egypt, Habayim Mitzrayim, and the Torah in beginning of Shmot simply backtracks and picks up from there. So let's pick up from there, and then it goes into the past tense. Yeah, they came. Ishu veito ba'u, and so on. But the Rav said a dynamite thought. The Medrash says, why does it say haba'im in the present tense? It says, Ruvain yarad, Ruvain Allah. Shimon yarad, Shimon Allah. Levi yarad, Levi Allah. Which means Ruvain, Shimon, Levi, they all went down to Mitzrayim. Ruvain, Shimon, Levi left Mitzrayim. Did the Medrash really mean that when we left Mitzrayim, Ruvain, the son of Yaakov, Shimon, the son of Yaakov, Levi, the son of Yaakov, Yehuda, the son of Yaakov, they were still alive and they went out? No. He said, so you might say to Shevet, Yafeh, but the Rav, he really fine-tuned it here, and he said that 3-4 generations later, they were still not just using the names of Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, but they were playing the role of Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. They were still Reuven, Shimon, and Levis. And they felt like they just got to Egypt. 300 years later, 200 years later, they felt they were migrants. They were new arrivals. They never got used to being Egyptians culturally. And that's why Chazal say they didn't change their language, they didn't change their names, they didn't change their garb. They looked Jewish. Ask the people in Amsterdam, they figured out right away who's Jewish, right? They measured the noses, right? The idea of being culturally, part of Bnei Israel, even in the context of Galut, the Rav said that's the only way there's a chance that there's going to be a redemption. The only way. Because if they somehow culturally integrate and assimilate, they'll never go out. And that's why the Rav felt he didn't like the word diaspora. said diaspora was too polite and refined of a word. It gave legitimacy for being there. He said, you say golus, and golus means exile. Well, we say today galut, but he said it as golus. And if you feel that you're detached, galut means detachment. And that's exactly what lo matzah hayona manoach. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was uncomfortable. He was with Am Yisrael. He was uncomfortable there, just as Am Yisrael is not to be comfortable in the situation of galut. But, says the Zohar, Ella b'Shabbat v'yamim tavim. On Shabbat and Yom Tov, HaKadosh Baruch Hu felt comfortable, even in galut. Why? Because the Kabbalists believed that the moment of Shabbat and Yom Tov, the spirit of Geula has kicked in. Even though you may still be in very dire straits in Chutz La'aretz. But there's something about the spirit of Geula that kicks in weekly, every Shabbat, and seasonally, every Yom Tov. Now we sing this in our Zmirot. Me'ein olam haba yom Shabbat menucha. It's part of the poetry. We sing about this. And what isn't Lecha Dodi, if not that? Lecha Dodi borrows phrases from Yeshayahu Hanavi. Hit-oruri, lo tevoshi v'lo tikomi. When we read the Haftarot after Tisha B'Av until Yom Kippur, until Rosh Hashanah, and we have the 7 Haftarot of consolation, all from Yeshayahu, and all of a sudden you start getting phrases that are familiar. Oh, I don't remember ever studying Yeshayahu in school. No, you went to shul Friday night, or you're home, you did Kabbalat Shabbat, and you know these phrases very clearly from Yeshayahu. So what is Lecha Dodi Likrat Kala, Penei Shabbat Nekabla, that you go out to welcome the Shechina. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is coming home for dinner Friday night. And that's what we're doing. Baruch Shalom, Ateret Ba'ala. We're welcoming the Shechina into our homes. Why are we doing this? Because on Shabbat, we put everything on the side, all our troubles, and it's a new world. I remember the Rabbi explaining once a sensation that he had when he was still a teenager, when the family had fled Chaslovich from White Russia, and they made it to Varsha in the midst of World War I, and he would daven occasionally in a Gerach Shtibel. Can you imagine? Gerach Sidim. And he always was amazed how people who were living in poverty the whole week and making a living and difficulty, struggling in life, would put on their spodek and their bekisha, and it was just a completely different existence. It was a transformation. It really was a transformation. And now perhaps we can understand why by the Chassidim, the Sudah Shlishit, or as they call it, Shalosh Sudis, would extend and extend. They wouldn't want to bring it to an end. Like, why go back to weekday, to reality? And they used to say a vort that, there's a Kabbalistic idea that even in the punishments, the heavenly punishments of Gehenom, whatever that's supposed to mean, it doesn't function on Shabbat and kicks up again after Shabbat. And they say that the Shomer of Gehenom looks down and wants to know if they said V'hu Rachum Yechaparov in bells, because they said in bells they were davening Ma'ariv Motzei Shabbos at 11 o'clock at night. So he wouldn't, turn on the heat until bells was already after Shabbos. But this is a joke, but it reflected a reality of stretching and stretching and stretching the Shabbat. And one of the reasons that we say V'hi Noam Hashem Elokeinu U'Maaseh Yadeinu Ki Malachav Yitzaveh Lach L'Shmorcha B'Chol Derechecha, this Tehillim Tzadik Aleph on Motzei Shabbat, is because we know that the neshamot are going back to a type of spiritual reality that's, let's just say, uncomfortable. So we're asking that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should pay attention to the neshamot for the next 6 days. And that's why, if there's a Yom Tov in the middle of the week, we dispense with saying Yoshe B'Seite Elyon B'Tzel Shadei Zlon on this parak on Motzei Shabbat, because the neshama is going to get a break on Tuesday, or on Wednesday, or on Thursday. It's not going to be a full week any longer. But if Yom Tov happens to be on Shabbat, like this year, Rosh Hashanah, not this year, but when Rosh Hashanah comes out on Shabbat, so the Motzei Shabbos before we will say it because it's a full week. But if Rosh Hashanah comes out on Thursday like this year, so the Motzei Shabbos before we didn't say it. And the only exception to this rule is if Pesach comes out on Shabbat. Well, what's the difference if Pesach comes out on Shabbat or Sukkot comes out on Shabbat or Rosh Hashanah comes out on Shabbat? The difference is that the Yom Tov of Pesach on one level begins with noontime on Erev Pesach, the moment of bringing the Korban Pesach. And how do I know that that's the moment of Yom Tov? Because Shalo Aleinu, we should know from Tzarot, a person sitting Shiva, as I did for my father a few days before Rosh Hashanah, so when does the Shiva end? With the onset of Yom Tov. Now, of course, Avi Rav says, take 2 hours to get ready, but that's practical. But when does the Avelis of the Shiva really break? When does the Avelis of Shiva come to an abrupt end? With sundown, mamish with sundown. And that would be the case for any other Yom Tov, except for Pesach. Person gets up from Shiva at noontime on Erev Pesach. Person who's sitting Shiva a day or 2 or 3 or 4 before Pesach, the Shiva ends on Erev Pesach at noontime. That's a halachic proof. So you have 6 hours of Friday afternoon, that's Yom Tov. So you don't have a full 6 days of divine punishment, so we dispense with the Perek of Yosher B'Sel Elyon on the Motzei Shabbos before. So all this, is factors in. So what does the Zohar say? That on Shabbos and Yom Tov, there is a sensation of Geula no matter where we are. There's one other practical ramification, not just the Zmirot that we sing that have, or L'chadodi for that matter, which is really big time, but the bracha of Hashkivenu, the second bracha after Shema at Ma'ariv. Hashkivenu Hashem Elokeinu, the Shalom B'amidenu, V'hagein Aleinu, Oyev, Deva, V'cherev. We ask for protection. Nighttime is dangerous. So that bracha of Hashkivenu is a bracha for protection. Well, how do we end it? Baruch Atah Hashem. Well, it depends. If you're in the weekday, we say, Shomer Amo Yisrael La'ad. Kadosh Baruch Hu protects Am Yisrael forever. How do we end it on Shabbat and Yom Tov? We say, Ufros Aleinu Sukat Shlomecha. That's if you're Ashkenaz. Ufros Aleinu Sukat Rachamim Chayim V'Shalom. If you're Nusach Sfard. Baruch Atah Hashem. Hapores Sukat Shalom Aleinu. V'Kol Amo Yisrael V'Al Yerushalayim. It's a completely different ending. Why do we do that? So it's been already pointed out by great people who've studied the law, the evolution of minhagim. So his name was Professor Toshma Zichron Livracha from the Hebrew University, a brilliant scholar. And he shows that there were actually 2 different versions of Ashkivenu, one for Eretz Yisrael and one for Bavel, for the diaspora. So in Eretz Yisrael, Shabbat, weekday, no matter what, they always ended with Hapores Sukat Shalom Aleinu, V'Kol Amo Yisrael V'Al Yerushalayim. Kadosh Baruch Hu should spread the canopy of peace on Am Yisrael and Yerushalayim. In Chutz La'aretz, whether it was Shabbat or weekday or Yom Tov, they always ended with Shomer Amo Yisrael La'ad. God should watch over us. In the days of the Geonim, they made a pshara. They made a compromise. And this is something that Professor Daniel Shperva has a whole chapter in his first volume of Minhagei Yisrael, customs that evolved because of compromise, like putting a mezuzah slanted, which is somehow reflects the dispute whether it should be vertical or horizontal. So we do neither. We put it horizontal. It's a compromise. Or like the Yeki minhag of waiting 3 hours after meat and before having milk, it's the compromise between the 6 hours of the Rambam, the Sfaradim, and the 1 hour of Ashkenaz up until the 16th century, and then became a little bit of a merger of 3 hours. So you have this concept of minhagim that developed as nothing but a compromise between the extreme, the polarized views. And here too, with regard to Hashkivenu, what happened was we all decided to say both Bavel and Eretz Yisrael, to conclude Shomer Amo Yisrael La'ad in the weekdays, and we all decided, Eretz Yisrael and Bavel, to conclude Hashkivenu with Haporei Sukat Shalom Aleinu Kol Amo Yisrael V'Yerushalayim on Shabbat and Yom Tov. Why? Because during the weekday, there's always trouble. And there could be trouble for Am Yisrael on a Friday night also. And there could be trouble for Am Yisrael on Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, on a time that, there could be trouble for Am Yisrael, whether it's in Bavel or in Eretz Yisrael. And nighttime symbolized darkness, it symbolized troubles and so on. So even in Eretz Yisrael, they opted for Shomer Amo Yisrael La'ad during the weekday. But on Shabbat and Yom Tov, the spirit of Geula kicks in, both in Eretz Yisrael and in Chutz La'aretz. So we adopted the Eretz Yisrael Nusach for Shabbat and Yom Tov. Shomer Amo Yisrael La'ad. What's the big fight here in Eretz Yisrael? How do you conclude Hashkivenu on Yom Ha'atzmaut and Yom Yerushalayim? That becomes a barometer of your Zionism. Oh, you're a real Tzioni? It's Yom Tov. You're not a Tzioni? It's not Yom Tov. Drop that. It has nothing to do with it. I refuse to be a participant in that particular machloket. But that's an active machloket. But I can show you, furthermore, in the tefillah itself, how we have we consider even a momentary spirit of being at the Beit HaMikdash, in the spirit that everything is the way it should be, and that's really tefillat musaf. Every tefillat musaf is V'sham Naseh Lefanecha et Korbanot Kovotenu, where we delineate the particular Korban Musaf of the special day, Shabbat, Yom Tov, Rosh Chodesh, whatever it may be. We actually are not only declaring readiness, but in the Musaf of Shalosh Regalim, something extremely interesting happens, where we're saying B'nei Beitcha Kevatchila V'chonen Miktashcha Mechono V'areinu B'vinyano V'samcheinu B'tikuno V'ashev Kohanim Lavodatam U'Leviyim L'Shiram U'Zimram. Everything will be restored and everything. When the Kohanim go up for Birkat Kohanim, in Chutz La'aretz, it's in amongst Ashkenazim, it's only by Musaf on the Yomim Tovim. So here, come to Eretz Yisrael, we're spoiled. Every morning, if the Kohanim show up, there's Birkat Kohanim every morning here. And the Shabbat twice, Shachar and Musaf. But in Chutz La'aretz, it's just for Musaf. So there was an ending of the bracha, Ritzei Hashem Elokeinu B'Amcha Yisrael V'Tfilatam, in Bayit Sheni. When Beit HaMikdash stood, we were already davening Shmona Esrei, because that was organized at the beginning of Bayit Sheni, the Anshe Knesset Gdolah. So they wouldn't say in Bayit Sheni, HaMachazir Shchinato L'Tzion, God should return to Tzion. If the Beit HaMikdash is up and functioning, you would assume that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was there. So there was a different ending. The ending was, She'otcha Levadcha B'yirah Navod, that only to you should we be serving. And the end was not B'techazena Eineinu B'shuvcha L'Tzion Brachamim, but Sham Navatcha B'yirah Kimei Olam Mchshanim Katoniot. The person davened in the Galil, or davened in Yavne, wherever it may have been, far from Beit HaMikdash in those days, for sure, somebody in Rome, or in Egypt, or in Bavel. There were plenty of Jews already in Babylon at the time. So the person said, Sham Navatcha, there, we should have an opportunity of getting to Beit HaMikdash and serving you properly. Baruch Hashem, she'otcha levatcha b'yirah navod. Now those of you who remember from our machzor from Chutz La'aretz, from Pesach Shavuot Sukkot, so we have this little add-on when the Shlich Tzibur says Ritzei right before Moedim, V'te'arav alecha atiratenu ke'ola u'churban, Ana rachum v'rachamecha rabim, Hashev shchinatcha l'tzion irecha, v'seder ha'avodah l'Yerushalayim. And then in Chutz La'aretz it reads, V'techazena einenu v'shubcha l'tzion brachamim, v'sham na'avatcha b'yirah kibei olam m'shanim kavaniyot, Baruch atah Hashem, she'otcha levatcha b'yirah navod. The Chazan ends with this bracha. Now the Vilna Gaon put an end to this. He said, sorry, you can't be into denial. There is no Beit HaMikdash, and she'otcha levatcha b'yirah navod is inappropriate. So even on Yom Tov, we have to say, V'techazena einenu b'shuvcha l'tzion brachamim, Baruch atah Hashem, ha'machazir shchinato l'tzion. And that became Minhag Eretz Yisrael. You open up every Rinat Yisrael, even if you live in Haifa, that's what we do. The Minhag HaGurah, the Minhag of the students of the Vilna Gaon, who come here about 250 years ago and spread this idea, it catches. It catches, and there's no community in Eretz Yisrael that here says She'otcha levatcha b'yirah navod, unless the Chazan who's davening Musaf on Pesach or Shavuot Sukkot is using a Chutz La'aretz machzor, and he's ignorant and he doesn't realize that that's not what you're supposed to do. So somebody has to point it out to him. That's all. But the Minhag Eretz Yisrael is to say Hamachazir Shchinato L'Tzion even on the Chagim. But the Rav explained, even though the Rav was Gaon Mivilna, first class, But the Rav explained, why did this minhag develop? Because there's a certain fantasy going on during Tfilat Musaf, as if we're now somewhere else. We're not in our local shul in California or in Toronto or in Melbourne. We are in Yerushalayim, and Beit HaMikdash is standing, and the Kohanim are going up to Duchen, and we say, Shotcha levatcha b'yiran avod. I mean, he saw it in a very positive way, that it is to imitate that which went on in the days of Beit HaMikdash. And one of the more classical manifestations of imitating the spirit of Beit HaMikdash is taking off your tefillin before Musaf on Rosh Chodesh. Why do we take off tefillin? So ladies, don't tell me you don't go to shul. You can go to shul and see this firsthand. What? Well, that's your problem. Yeah. If you are a daughter of Rashi, maybe you would have worn tefillin, right? Or Michal bat Shaul, the Gemara says she wore tefillin, and right? Right. So what? Say it. Correct. So when is it Yom Tov? How much of Rosh Chodesh is Yom Tov? So Rosh Chodesh is a weekday, right? And all it is the Gabbai says, Ya Leviova, like the in Beit HaMikdash. In Beit HaMikdash. So where do we replicate that atmosphere? In Musaf of Rosh Chodesh. So there, when you have Musaf Rosh Chodesh, based on the pasuk in Ba'alotcha, Uv'yom simchatchem uvemoadechem uveroshei chodshechem utkatem b'chatzotzot al alotechem b'zevchei kamlechem v'yu lachem lizikaron lefnei Hashem Elokechem. That's where it's Yom Tov. So if it's Yom Tov, you have to take off your tefillin. And then comes the big machloket. Do you take it off before Kaddish or after Kaddish? Easy, Yofi says a machloket. I mean, can you imagine if we wouldn't have a machloket, it would be boring. Life would be boring. And the question is the Kaddish a summation of what we just said, the psukim of bringing the Sefer Torah back to the Aron Kodesh, or is a promo to Musaf? So and it's machloket between Rabbi Yosef Karo, the Sfaradi, and the Ramah, the Ashkenazi. And the Rabbi Yosef Karo says it's actually a promo for Musaf, and the Ramah, the Ashkenazi, says it's on the psukim that we just said, and that's why, because of that, the minhag is that the Chazan says Kaddish, and then everybody takes a pause, and then take off the tefillin. And because tefillah b'tzibur means starting together with everybody, with the Chazan, usually the Chazan gives a little bit of a clap. So he's signaling, I'm starting now. So don't wind your tefillin now, just do that after Kedusha, and just put it down. And start together. Let's say if women are in shul, they should wait till the clap on Musaf, on Rosh Chodesh, till the Chazan starts Musaf. That's called tefillah b'tzibur, starting to daven together with the tzibur. But the Rav identified with the Rav Yosef Karo on this, and he said that the Kaddish goes on the Musaf, and therefore we should take off the tefillin before Kaddish and be ready for Musaf before the Kaddish. And you know what one of his proofs were? Not that I liked Rav Yosef Karo this morning. That wasn't it at all. This was something highly unusual. We knew, and it's not Lashon Torah because he readily admitted it, and we saw it was true. He was gifted with a lot of things, but not music. Even though he was a Levi, he always said he'd invite Shlishi, he'll never be on the choir. He knew that. He wouldn't be on the choir. But he said that in Nusach Ashkenaz, when the Chazan says Kaddish before a special Musaf, so he ends with Damiran be'almav himroam. He goes into the niggin of the Musaf. When he does the Kaddish for Tal and Geshem, he does the niggin for the Chazar Sashatz of Tal and Geshem. When he does the Kaddish before Nila, he does the niggin of the Chazar Sashatz of Nila. In other words, there's a certain connection in the world of Nusach meaning the music that goes along with the davening, that connects the Kaddish with the Musaf and not what was going on beforehand. And therefore, he believed that the Kaddish actually belonged to the Musaf. And if that's the case, then the tefillin had to be removed before the Kaddish. What's interesting is that on Shabbat morning, when Rabbanim get up and say a drasha, so they say it before the Kaddish. And that's not after the Kaddish. The Chazan doesn't say Kaddish and then the Rabbi speaks, but the Rabbi speaks. And so somebody once said, I have a cousin in America who said, what are the 4 most cherished words in the Siddur? He said, Chadish Yemenu Kekedem Yizgadal. That means the rabbi's not speaking today. Can't get better than that. Right? Chayde Shemenu Kikedem Yizgadal. Oh, wonderful. Sweet words. But why does the rabbi speak before the Kaddish? So where did that ever come from? The rabbi's drasha. It's actually a reframing of the takana of Ezra HaSofer that said that we should read minimum 10 psukim at any given lanings. Of course, Shabbat a lot more than 10 psukim because you have to have 7 people getting aliyot. But you have to have maturgaman. You have to have a translation. And the maturgaman doesn't mean reading Onkelos that we would need translators for the translation because we don't know the Aramaic. But the translation is supposed to be commentary. When somebody's supposed to explain the psukim. Now, in Europe, Ashkenazi Jews knew Parshat HaShavua cold, and they were doing Shnai Mikra Vecha Targum. They were reading on Friday with the Targum. You didn't need anybody in shul to do that for you. So the Rav of the town would get up and explain something about the Parsha that the average guy in shul would never have thought of. A chidush, something novel, some application to life, what we call a homiletic drasha or homiletic application. So if a Rav gets up on Shabbos morning and says, it says in this week's Parsha, Vayera Elav Hashem Be'elon Amamrei, and Rashi says such and such and such, and that's his drasha. I'm sorry, the people know what Rashi says. What are you doing? You're not teaching me anything. But if you get up there and say, Rashi says such and such, but what he just said is highly problematic because in light of something else, this doesn't make sense, this is out of context, this is wrong, why does he do it? And then you build a case and then come back to it and say, and now we understand what Rashi is doing. That's a geschmacka drasha, that's a drasha that's worthwhile listening to. And when does he do it? He does it before the Kaddish because he wants to attach it to the Kriyas HaTorah. Because right before we just put that to Sefer Torah, which means we're still in our mode of Kriyat Torah. You took out the Sefer Torah, you lane, the Haftarah, you put it back, you're still there, because Kaddish means next on the agenda. He gets up and he says the drasha. There are some Rabbanim, by the way, who do that during laning. Rabbi Riskin in Lincoln Square would get up 7 times during laning after each aliyah or before each aliyah and say something about the aliyah and explain something about the aliyah. That was really in conformity with the takana of Ezra HaSofer. So I'm just pointing out why the Rav gives the drasha before the Kaddish and not after the Kaddish. They still do. The Teimanim, right. The Teimanim, the Yemenites still have the Onkelos reading with the Kriyat Torah because they never moved on. That's all. They understand it. Of course, if you're a Teimani going to a Teimani Cheder, you learn how to read Hebrew upside down because there was one Chumash in the center and all the kids sat around. So those kids who sat the opposite, they had to learn Aleph Bet Hafuch, upside down. And they know how to read upside down. Right. I guess what you can do is you can train your brain to see it in that way. And that's what they do. That's really phenomenal. Okay, so now we have V'lo matzah bo manoach. This is a Kadosh Baruch Hu, not in Galut on Shabbat. And now you understand why, according to this explanation of the Zohar, why we sing Yona matzah bo manoach on Shabbat. Because on Shabbat, the Yonah has found a resting place, even if you sing it in Teaneck. No matter where you're singing it, Kadosh Baruch Hu has found a resting place on Shabbat. The Shekhinah is there. Now, from where do we know, Bemet, this whole idea of Imo Anuchi B'Tzara, not just from the Pasuk in Tilim Tzadik Aleph, but from Shmot, from the Galut in Mitzrayim. So here it says, in source number 3, Va'ered lahatzilo. Kadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe Rabbeinu, I personally will go down to save Am Yisrael, Miyad Mitzrayim, and I will bring them up. So here's where we learn, but we see it already in Sefer Breshit, that leaving Eretz Yisrael is a Yeridah, is going down. Going to Eretz Yisrael is an Aliyah. So even though there's a medrash that says Eretz Yisrael Gavoha Mikol Haratzot, Eretz Yisrael from a topography point of view is higher elevation than any other country in the world. Take that not only with a grain of salt, but with the whole shaker. There are places in this world that are higher. There's one thing that we have in Eretz Yisrael that's the lowest point on the globe. That's in the Dead Sea. Yeah.
I always understood a red man because he's coming down from Shemayim.
Who's coming down from Shemayim? Leaving Eretz Yisrael?
No, in the process.
Here. Here, Va'ered means to go down to Mitzrayim. And Ve'ered la'atzilo miyad Mitzrayim means HaKadosh Baruch Hu is speaking to Moshe Rabbeinu. And he's telling him, you're right. From whatever abode HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in, he's going down to Mitzrayim. That idea of going down to Mitzrayim, you already have in Sefer Breshit. You have the brothers going down to Mitzrayim. V'Yosef hurad Mitzrayma. Right? It's there. It's all over the place. And coming back to Eretz Canaan in Breshit is to go up. To go up. So it's not an accident that we call it Aliyah. It's not an accident. I mean, obviously the early Zionist leaders looked for words that would be biblical and make the point. Why do you think El Al calls its plane El Al? Because of a pasuk that talks about coming to up. Not only because the plane is up, because it's going to take people to Eretz Yisrael. So I told my son once that when you take people out of Eretz Yisrael, you got to change the name. So he had a good answer. He had a very good answer. The Gemara talks about Yerida l'tzorach aliyah. That there's a concept that you can go down for purposes of coming back up. And it's temporary. Okay, whatever it is, it's temporary. So here you have Ulal Tov min Aretzu. Where to? El Eretz Tova Urchava. This is the first time we're going to see this. El Eretz Zavat Chalav Udvash. El Makom HaKnani V'Chiti V'Amori V'Prizi V'Chevi V'Yevusi. These locations, these nations occupying Palestine at the time are mentioned already in the parsha we just read, in Lech Lecha, in the Brit Bein Abtarim. We already have Girgashi. Right, so Chazal say Girgashi is absent, noticeably absent, conspicuously absent, because what happened was Yeshua sends letters before we conquer Eretz Canaan. And the first letter said, you have an option. Option number one is you accept 7 mitzvot b'nei Noach, and we will regard you and accept the fact that we're coming in and taking over without a fight, and you will be regarded as ger toshav, a certain status, and we will guarantee your sustenance, your protection, and everything. You'll be part of the country, but you have to be loyal to the Am Yisrael state. You don't like that? We'll give you a chance to pack your bags and leave. And Girgashi packed their bags and left. And if you don't like that, we're going to fight you. And we did. And it took quite a few generations, because Kibush Eretz Yisrael, the conquering of Eretz Yisrael, begins in Yeshua and doesn't really culminate till David HaMelech. Beit HaMikdash is built 480 years after Yetziat Mitzrayim. So it was a long undertaking, the conquering of Eretz Yisrael. Very long. It's still going on. Good. Still going on. Right. Nebuch. Yeah. So what is Eretz Zavat Chalav Udvash? That every sakit chalav leaks? What does it mean? Eretz Zavat Chalav Udvash. What does that mean? We say it all the time. We sing it. Eretz Zavat Chalav. What does Eretz Zavat Chalav Udvash mean? It means a land that will be blessed with sweet fruit. That's what it means. Sweet fruit. Sweet and nutritious fruit. It's a nickname for Eretz Yisrael. Zavat Chalav Udvash. I once, on a more homiletic sense, explained that there's a world of a difference between the shelf life without refrigeration of milk and honey. Honey will last on the shelf mi Rosh Hashanah zu ad Rosh Hashanah haba leinu l'tova and beyond. And milk, without refrigeration, after 3-4 days, you're going to know that it's been without refrigeration. So what does that mean? It means Eretz Yisrael is endowed with a dual quality. It can last with us forever, or it can sour on us. And it's going to depend on whether we're going to make it into dvash or chalav. So that's a sobering thought, that it's not just a given, but we can guarantee that it's dvash if we work at it. And if we don't, it's going to sour, it's going to spoil. But Eretz Zavat Chalav Udvash in the Pshat means it promises us good sweet fruit. Furthermore, there's a Gemara in Masechet Bechorot Tavav that says, from where do we know that we're allowed to eat bees' honey? Bee is a sheretz. So how can you eat bees' honey? Comes from a sheretz. And something that comes, if you have milk from a non-kosher animal, you can't drink the milk. So why can you have the So the Gemara gives two answers. The Gemara says, well, if Eretz Yisrael is blessed with Eretz Zalvat Chalav Udvash, how can it be treif? That's a very interesting. Even though in the context of the 7 species, Eretz Chita Usora, Gefen Teinav Rimon, Eretz Eitz Shemen Udvash, there it means dates. It means dates, Dvash Tamarim. But here it doesn't mean Dvash Tamarim. It means, the Gemara says, it means bees honey. And if it's bees honey and Eretz Yisrael is blessed with this, there's no way that you can't have it. It's like a special Gzerat HaKatuv, special dispensation from above that we're allowed to have honey. That's one reason in the Gemara. The second reason in the Gemara is that honey is not an integral part of the physiology of the bee, but the bee houses it and makes the honey, but it never becomes part and parcel of the bee. It's somehow separate. This led great people like Rav Moshe Tendler, Zatzal, my great biology Rabbi, who said that the same applies to vitamins. And he explained it to Shver, Rav Moshe Feinstein, he explained it to Rav Moshe Feinstein, why vitamins that come from non-kosher animals are kosher. They're even glatt kosher. It has nothing to do with the animal, because vitamins are external to the physiology of the organism, he said. And therefore, if you have vitamins that come from liver extract, they're parv. They're not only kosher, but they're parv. They don't have a bisari content to them, identity to them, nor a non-kosher identity to them if the animal happens to have been not kosher. So therefore, when you get a bottle of vitamin pills and so on, and the drugstore says, but we have here, with the hashgacha of the badats, it's just that it costs twice as much. I'm telling you that if it's a pill that you just pop like any aspirin, you can take the cheaper variety and it's just as kosher, because there's nothing non-kosher about vitamins. And so too, by the way, with capsules and the whole gelatin issue, which according to the Rav's grandfather, Rav Chaim from Brisk, gelatin is actually kosher because it's shinui. It evolved into gelatin and has not lost its pig identity if it came from pigs, and therefore there's no problem with that, with gelatin. But Rav Aaron Kotler Zatzal had a big chumrah on this, and we grew up in America. The gelatin was chaza treif, right? Until we came to Eretz Yisrael, and we discovered that the Rabbanayot, they give asherim on confectionery products with gelatin. But if you have a capsule that you just gulp down, so even if it's chaza treif, it's not prohibited, because that's not called eating. So they have all kinds of capsules of all kinds of different food additives and so on that they sell also in a quote-unquote kosher variety, but omega-3, right? So omega-3, and there's a box that says kosher, right? It costs 3 times the price, right? But you can take the regular one and just gulp it down. There's absolutely no halachic issue with it, and it's not going, yeah, Bakasha.
We only want to support the companies that
Only by Aimzeh. Only by, I have no problem if you're paying for the more expensive product is because you want to support the company that has gauged the services of a mashgiach. Okay, that's okay. It's no different, by the way, no different than Horowitz Magretten matzahs for Pesach. They carry the OU, and the Breuer's community, Rabbi Yosef Breuer, received the first 18 minutes of every morning's production, which is a little bit of a chumrah, that's good. Because even though we clean the machines every 18 minutes, we stop the machines, and a chemical flow goes through all the parts and breaks down any type of residue, dough that might be there, and it's kosher lePesach. But a la boker, as they say, first thing in the morning, they're perfectly clean. You can't get cleaner because they clean all the parts at night. So Rav Breuer gets the first batch, and they sell it with Rav Breuer's hashgacha at a higher price. That's okay. If you belong to the Breuer community and you want to support the community, that's perfectly okay. Perfectly okay. And there's no reason that in a community, and everybody knows, it's public knowledge that that's what's going on. And everybody knows that the Breuer's matzahs are OU matzahs. It's Horowitz Magretten. Everybody knows that also. So this is all public knowledge, and they up the price because you're giving a donation for every box of matzah that you buy. That's okay. I have a problem with with hashgachot on bottled water for Pesach, maybe the hashgacha goes on the bottle. I don't know. What? Mahadran, right. Look, I'll tell you, in 2006, 2010, when I was flying back and forth monthly to Switzerland, so I discovered that there was, for bottled water for Pesach, there were two supermarket chains, Co-op and Migros, it was called. So one of them gave the hashgacha for Pesach in Zurich. But in Basel, it was the other chain that gave the hashgacha for bottled water. And people said that if you travel on Chol Hamoed between Zurich, they have to look out for the different company, And I looked at them and I said, you're really out of your mind. It's the same water. It's the same water. But the community signed up with one of the chains for the hashgacha, as if you needed hashgacha for the water, for Pesach. But all right, But to think that if you had water from the other companies, not kosher l'Pesach. Anyway, so this is ve'ered lahatzilo. But I want to see the medrash on number 4, what the medrash says on ve'ered lahatzilo. And I heard the explanation on this medrash, both from our Rabbi the Rav. He wrote it in a speech. He said it in a speech, and I wasn't at the speech, at a Mizrahi convention. And you'll hear why it came up there. And Reb Shlomo Kalbach said it as well. This coming Motzei Shabbos will be his 30th yahrzeit. And he said it also on the same medrash. He may have heard it from the Rav, I don't know. But he said the same thing. Amar Reb Shimon, Gedola chibatan shel Yisrael shenigla HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'makom avodat kochavim. Great is the love of Am Yisrael by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has exiled himself to the place of Goyim, b'mkom avodat kochavim, or b'mkom tinofet. Tinofet means filth, spiritual filth, or b'mkom tum'ah. Why did he do it? B'shvil l'ga'alan, so that he would redeem them. Means HaKadosh Baruch Hu was willing to put himself out in places that he, with a capital H, didn't belong, in order to save his children, Am Yisrael. Mashal, here's the analogy. L'kohen shenafla trumato lebeit hakfarot. Now, a kohen gets truma. Now, he has to eat it when he's tahor, and the truma has to be tahor. And all of a sudden, he sees that somebody snatched a bag of truma fruits from his, and threw it over the fence in the cemetery. Now, kohen can't get it. So what is he going to do? Let the truma fruit rot? You're not supposed to do that either. That's called ibud kodashim, to destroy something that's holy. You're not allowed to do that. Those fruits to be eaten by the kohen, of course. But how can he go into the Beit Kfarot? Don't tell me call somebody else. That's not the scenario. The scenario is he's alone. The truma is on the other side of the fence in the Beit Kfarot, and now he has to make a judgment what to do. To leave it alone. Omer, ma'aseh, what shall I do? Litameh et atzmi, iyefshar. How can I become tameh? You're not allowed to do that. Ulaniach trumati, aleph. That's not Aaron Adler. That's iyefshar. You can't do that either. So he's in a quandary. But then he says like this: Mutavli, I prefer litameh et atzmi pa'am achat. So one shot deal, I'll become tameh. V'chozer u'mitaher, and I will purify myself. There's paraduma. There is a way to purify yourself from this tumah. So becoming tameh is an investment. It's a correct investment in order to save the truma. V'lo e'aved trumati, and the truma won't go down the sewer. I'll be able to save the truma. Kach avotenu. So too with Kadosh Baruch Hu says about our forefathers. Hayu trumato shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu sees his children as his truma. Shneimar, as it says in Yirmiyahu, Kodesh Yisrael Lashem. Well, that doesn't help us. It says Vav Gimel Vav V'Gomer. You have to know the end of the pasuk. It says Reishit Tfuatai. They are the first of my crop. Oh, that means it's truma. Reishit Trumatai is the Reishit, the first, which is taking off before you take off anything else. That's Am Yisrael. And my children, says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, are sitting in a cemetery. Hayu Beit Kfarot, as it says in Mitzrayim, Kein Bayit Asher Ein Shamet. By Makat Bechorot, every house had somebody died, which means the whole Mitzrayim is one big cemetery. You know what this reminds me? I'm just opening this window for a second. Please remind me to close it. You know where I'm up to. With regard to Kohanim taking the trip to Poland, Rav Shapiro, who was Zichron Levracha, was chief rabbi in the 80s, said the Kohanim can't go to Poland at all because the whole Poland is one big cemetery.
That's right.
It's one big cemetery. Okay, Rav Mordechai Eliyahu said you can go, you just have to know where to go. But the idea that it's all one big cemetery, the Medrash says it here with regard to Mitzrayim. Kein bayit Hashem shamet, and it also says in Bamidbar uMitzrayim mikabrim. They were burying all over Egypt. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, Heichani goalan. How can I redeem Am Yisrael? Lanicham, leave them there in Egypt in the filth of Mitzrayim. Aleph Aleph, Iyavshar, can't do that. Mutav lereid, it is preferred that I go down there ulahatzilan, and to save them, as it says va'ereid lahatzilan, latzilo, I'll go down beyond Mitzrayim. Kishotzi, and when we'll get them out, kara la'aron, I'll call Aaron a Kohen. V'tiheroti, oto, and it will purify me, as it says v'chiper et mikdash hakodesh, and it says v'chiper al hakodesh, means Aaron a Kohen will also atone and purify and cleanse the holy. I mean, a reference to Kadosh Baruch Hu here, obviously. In context, those pasukim mean a little bit something else. But at least in this midrashic usage of the pasuk, that the Aaron HaKohen will do what he has to do to get me clean again, and that's okay. And what do you learn from this? You learn from this that sometimes a Jew has to be mitameh, has to soil himself in order to save Jews. So I'll give two applications to this. One is, I remember this from Rabbi Joseph Luckstein, Zichron Levracha. Remember Rabbi Joseph? Many of you do remember him. The great rabbi from the Jewish Center, the KJ, Kilat Yeshurun, not the Jewish Center, KJ, Kilat Yeshurun, in the Upper East Side, other side of the park. Right? I'm sorry. The Jewish Center was Rabbi Lamb. Rabbi Lamb was the Jewish Center, right? KJ, Kilat Yeshurun. So he was really over 50 years, rabbi, and he said that any knew, and we're talking now in the 30s and the 40s, so the yeshiva, in Yeshiva Yitzchak Hanan Yeshiva, which becomes Yeshiva University, so some of the Masmachim would take positions in the Rabbanus where the shul was problematic, either separate seating, mixed seating, separate seating without a mechitza, but not a terribly high mechitza, or proper mechitza, all different types of quote-unquote problematic shuls. And the yeshiva was quietly encouraging this. Dr. Belkin, Zichron Levracha, second president of yeshiva, very much encouraged this. And some people used to suggest, because from such shuls you had a better shot at fundraising for YU than at pure Orthodox shuls who are cheap. And he was probably right on that one. But Rabbi Luckstein said that the going into these shuls with the idea of kiruf, let's try to see what we can do, and bring them back, was a worthy undertaking. So Rabbi Izzy Miller, Zichron Levracha, who was at the time when I was in the yeshiva, vice president of the yeshiva, and a seasoned shul rabbi as well in the Bronx, the Kingsbridge Jewish Center, where he himself started in the shul that was not 100%, but made it into a shul that was 100%. No different than Rabbi Riskin at the Lincoln Square, and no different than Rabbi Berzon in the what became then the Young Israel of Avenue K, but had a different name, but it was not like that. And other great rabbis who succeeded. So Rabbi Miller told us that he did a survey of the YU guys, Musmachim, who did take positions in quote-unquote problematic shuls. Where were they holding after 3 years in the rabbinate? So he said 10% succeeded after 3 years of turning it around. 30% were so, he said 20%, another 20% were so disillusioned that they won't be able to do anything, that by the end of the third year, they already left the shul. They saw it was a bracha levatala. So that's 30% of the crop. And 70% after 3 years, to them it was no longer a problematic shul. They got used to the situation. Okay, now he said it in a way that we should understand that this is risky. This is risky from many, many points of view. But what Rabbi Luckstein taught us was still in place. And I say it also in today's situation. I want to get into a whole discussion now about, the army and so on. But it is true that sometimes to save Am Yisrael, physically, you have to jeopardize something about what you consider your bubble, your spiritual bubble, and you have to go out of the spiritual bubble and worry about quote unquote spiritual contamination, but have at least as a backup in hand how you're going to purify yourself. So let's just take Yeshivat Hesder as a good example. Yeshivat Hesder has those things in place of purification. That is, the guys are going to the army, they're yeshiva boys, but they're going back to the yeshiva. And while they're in the army, the Roshei Yeshiva and the Ramim are going out there to see them all the time and printing Dapei Parshat HaShavua all the time. In other words, they never lose contact with them. So yes, it's a scenario that's far from the atmosphere of Beit Midrash and can potentially be catastrophic even, and there have been cases like that. But does it have to be so? For sure not. And can a person say, I'm sorry, I have to worry about my et nafshi hitzalti, I have to worry about my spiritual health, and therefore I have no obligation to save any other Jew. That's unacceptable. And what the Rav said and why he used this at the Mizrahi Convention, he said even political involvement, we all know, is not the cleanest endeavor. And he said, why did Chazal institute Netilat Yadayim? And here the Rav was really sharp in his homiletic usage, because the Gemara says, Yadayim askanayot heim, because hands are always busy. It means you can be touching something that you don't even realize, because hands are busy. They're busy. Yadayim askanayot. But the Rav played on the word askan, which means a macher. Today in modern Hebrew, when you say askan, it means a macher, a political macher. And it means these are the guys who are involved in the dirty work. So that's what the Rav said, Yadayim askanayotein, you have to know how to do netilat yadayim afterwards. You have to know how to clean yourself afterwards. But it doesn't mean don't do it. And he was encouraging people in the Mizrahi who are part of the world of Torah to get involved. And the Rav had the highest regard for Rav Neria, who was Zechron Lebracha, who was the founder of the Yeshiva B'nai Akiva movement here in Eretz Yisrael, and was a Chaver Knesset. And then Rav Drukman, Zechron Lebracha, who was a Rosh Yeshiva of a high school, and then became a Hesder Yeshiva in Or Etzion, near right past Ashkelon, Kiryat Malachi rather, right past between Kiryat Malachi and Ashkelon. So, and he became a member of the Knesset. And there were other B'nai Torah. What? Rav Drukman, right? And they became and they remained clean. They remained clean. They had to involve themselves in the dirty work of the political arena, but they also were able to remain clean and so on. And if you look at source number 5, where the Torah says in Parshat Va'era, with regard to going out of Mitzrayim, L'chein amor lefnei Yisrael ani Hashem, v'hotzeiti etchem mitachat tzivlot Mitzrayim. This is the first of the 4 expressions of Geula. V'hotzeiti etchem, I will take you out. Source number 6 plays on this in the piyut, in the poem that we said in Hoshana every single day, in the section Kehoshata, after we finish going around with the Lulav and Esrog. And then there's like a poem that we say when we're standing at attention before we put back the Sefer Torah from Hoshanas. Kehoshata ma'amar v'hotzeti, as a Kadosh Baruch Hu saved us in the expression, I will take you out. Nakuv, you can read it with different dots. Nakuv ve'hutzeti itchem, and I have taken myself out. Yes, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I will take you out, referring to God taking out Am Yisrael. At the same moment, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I will take myself out from with you. Nakuv, can be read with the dots, the grammar. V'hutzeti itchem, kein Hoshana. So this reflects the idea that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was with us in Galut and had to bring himself out as well. And that's what the Gemara says in source number 7. It says, Tanya, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai Omer, Bo'o reish kama chavivin Yisrael lefnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. How beloved Am Yisrael is, shebechol makom shegalu, wherever Am Yisrael went into Galut, Shechina imahem. And it goes and lists all the various Goliot, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu will take us out. Not only will take us out, he will have to take himself out of Galut as well. As the last line say, V'shav Hashem Elokecha shvutcha v'heishiv lo ne'emar. It doesn't say v'heishiv. It says v'shav. Melamed she'Kadosh Baruch Hu shav imahen mibein ha'galuyot. Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to have to take himself out of the Galuyot as well.